Hello everyone, welcome to the Power of Youth Plus. I'm Xinmeng. You know, it's been 80 years since the victory in World Anti-Fascist War, and the UN was founded around the same time. So crazy to think how much history shapes the world we live in today. Now today we are walking through Renmin University of China, meeting students from different countries to talk about how history echoes in their memories and what peace means to them across cultures. Welcome back, everyone. Today we are diving into how different cultures remember war and peace and how these memories shape young people's understanding of peace. I just attended a massive military parade on September the 3rd, marking the 80th anniversary of Chinese people's war of resistance against Japanese aggression and the World Anti-Fascist War. So let's hear from our guests today about their impression and experiences. So hi, everyone. First, let's wave hello to our audience and so I know all of you have your own stories and experience from your countries. Can't wait to hear them. So first question, how did you first come across the idea of war or peace? Was it from school or family stories or any commemoration events?
For myself, I'm from Canada, and it's common that we begin studying both World War I, World War II in our youth, so I would say around grade 3, grade 4, so 8 years old, 9 years old. So that's the first point at which we start grappling with the concept of war.
And how about you?
For me, because I'm Chinese, so it's very popular for my grandparents to watch like war-themed TV programs. So I watched with them, and I remember the first time I was a few years old, and I think I asked my grandmother why these enemies for no reason shoot people, and I say why the police won't stop them, and she said it's about war. This is war, so they won't stop them. Yes.
And Elliot?
Right, so I'd say very similar to Haley, because I'm from Sweden, right? So, because Sweden's been neutral for such a long time, so, you know, my parents, my grandparents, they have no memory of a war, really, like not in that way at least. So definitely from school, yeah. You know, talking about World War I, World War II, mostly those wars, exactly. That gave you like a concept or an idea about it.
So all of you from a very young age have the idea of war.
Yeah.
And if you had to describe peace in one sentence, what would it be?
For me, the first word that comes to mind is harmony and mutual coexistence.
Well, I think it's an order or structure where we have the agreement that we all want to have this justice and equality.
I mean, if it's like on a societal level, then I suppose not necessarily a society without conflict, but where conflicts between people are solved in a non-violent way and, you know, taking regard to everyone's interests.
So I just attended the September 3rd Victory Day Parade, which is very impressive for me, myself. Have you guys followed the event? What do you think about it?
Unfortunately, I didn't get the pleasure of attending the event in person, but someone who's quite dedicated to the study of Chinese politics and deepening my knowledge of Chinese society, I was excited to watch it play out in all forms of social media, and I just think it's an incredible collaboration among all forces really in the country. And I think one of the interesting aspects of it as a student in China is also watching it and juxtaposing it with the ongoing military training happening on our school campus, because it just kind of reflects the dedication that the country has towards cultivating this sort of strong face and position in the world.
So what's your favorite part about the parade?
Really, the parade for me is all about bringing people together from every corner of the society and showing that sense of collaboration, and also the seamless nature of it as well. Even though it takes so much work in the preparation, everything comes together seamlessly. It actually looks like it's animated because of how perfect and synchronous everyone is moving in footstep with each other. So I find that just fascinating.
How about you, Xiaoxiao?
Okay, I watched that with my parents, the live broadcast of the parade. I think it's very proud to see that the development of our country. And there's one thing particularly touches me is that when the plane fly over to our Tongzhou campus, there are so many of my friends sending photos that they are flying over our school. So I think it is because someone is protecting us, so we could have this peaceful school life on campus.
And, okay, how about Elliot?
Yeah, sadly, I didn't really watch it. Of course, I was aware of it, when it was happening, but I was having other stuff going on, so I did not watch it. But I watched some playbacks and just some, summaries and, what people wrote and said about it. I mean, I think it's a very impressive, and important, it has a symbolic significance that I really like. Like China's a country growing from weak to strong. And then that, like the show of this kind of military power, that it's actually about, it's about preserving peace, right? It's using these forces to preserve peace, which I like.
Yeah, the short clips are everywhere, the playback online.
Sure, yeah.
Everybody's talking about it. So this is how China choose to commemorate the war. And there are a lot of countries commemorating war this year. We saw a lot of parades going on in other countries. So how do you think a country's choice of how it commemorates war reflects its value?
Well, with China's approach, it's quite a peaceful approach to commemorate a tragic event, and I think that has symbolism in and of itself, because it's showing that while we acknowledge this and we acknowledge the very raw nature of it, given the sort of recent nature of it in the span of history, we also are turning directions and we're focused on what's coming next. So it's coming to terms with the past while focusing on future developments and focusing on how far the country has also come since that period. And I think why the seamless nature of the parade itself is what fascinates me, is because that is symbolic of the country's ability to mobilize and to get something done when the right resources are put in place, and when someone says we want to go this direction, it can happen.
In China, we have been through so many wars before in our history, so it's the commemoration is kind of solemn in our country. We take it very seriously, and I think it's a way that we know the peace is not for granted because of the history. So we need to cherish the peace. It's the reminder for us that as the dissidents, we should not forget about the history, and we should cherish this peaceful future brought by our ancestors. Yes.
Yeah, that's very good. Peace is not for granted. A lot of people sacrifice for that.
Agree with what the two other guests have already said. I mean, I don't know if I should add something if it comes to like reflecting values. I mean, once again, I think it goes back to that, many people, especially outside of China, they might point to a military parade and say, well, this is very antagonistic or this is a bit scary. But also I think that if you say that, you shouldn't forget the fact that the reason that China was able to beat Japan in the war was because of military, right? It was using military measures. So I think that, along with the whole peace thing, the whole peace narrative, showing the modern day military, it's also a display of how China's military has developed from back then to now, which is the reason they were able to defeat the Japanese, right?
So how do your country's history experience influence, your country's young people's understanding of peace today?
Coming from Canada, I feel that in my society today there's actually a lack of a focus on it and what peace means and what peace looks like. And I think, unfortunately, we're not doing a good enough job at discussing our history and taking note of what the lessons are that we draw from that. There's more of an attempt in my society today to sort of erase some of the history, and this is why I believe that taking the time to host such events, China's military parade, is important, because again, it's focusing on the past and reminding what the country has fought through together, and what that means for their current day capacities and how they can move forward. So I could speak about this in more detail, but in the interest of time, this event has actually provoked my thinking on the importance of having some kind of military training of some sort in my own country, because it's a testament to the importance of keeping the country unified, giving us a collective identity, and reminding us that we can coexist with different ideas, different ideologies, but at the end of the day, we have our shared common identity, and that's what's most important.
Mm-hmm. Just in case our audience doesn't know about how military training on campus is like, do you want to share a little bit of your observation here on campus?
Absolutely. I think if someone was to hear military training, they might think it's this intense, but I would say the military training is quite seamless here, and they go through a lot of exercise drills, a lot of collaborations. Some of it leans more military in fashion, some of it looks more of like a sophisticated sports training camp, I would say, but making sure the body is fit and the mind is aware of how to respond to very specific circumstances. So I think it's something that's very manageable, and it's not violent in nature. It's just strategic and preparatory.
Mm-hmm. And Xiaoxiao, do you want to share your experience? How many military training have you been through?
I think it's about 3 or 4 times. Every time you entered a new study phase, you will have this training prepared for by the school. I remember when I was in middle school, we had this training. I don't think it's mainly about military training. It's like it's more about we get prepared to be independent.
Yeah. Exactly. I think it's mainly for building a strong mind instead of a strong body. It's only like lasts for 1 week or 2 weeks or so. How do you think Sweden's historical experience shape Swedish people's
Our perception of peace?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, that's the interesting thing about Sweden. I think Sweden is quite famous internationally for always having had this very neutral foreign policy. Except we joined NATO now, right? But that's another thing, right? If we should have filmed this 2 years ago, right? But aside from that, we've always had this pretty neutral foreign policy. And the last time we actually went to war was about 250 years ago with the Russians. And how it influences us, I think it's kind of two-sided. So in one respect, since we've been neutral for such a long time, the fact that we've had peace in our country has provided good conditions for us to develop. One interesting thing is that, for example, if you go to Stockholm, which is where I'm from, right? You go to like the Stockholm Old Town, you'll notice that all the old buildings we have there, they're from the 1400s, the 1500s. They're all like, they're all preserved very well, and they're the same as they've always been. But for example, if you go to Germany, if you go to, for example, Dresden, which is a very beautiful city in Germany, but you look at the old buildings, they're actually all redone. They're remade because they were bombed during the war. But in Sweden, we've been very lucky that we've never been invaded, never been bombed. So we've been able to preserve that history and that culture. And that makes us very grateful for our peace. So it makes us appreciate peace, and view it, as very important. But obviously at the same time, also linking to what Haley said, I don't think people in Sweden understand truly how terrible a war would be. And that also has to do with the fact that we haven't been to war, right? Like for example, my grandparents, when they were alive, they never had any memories to share with me about how terrible it was being in a war because we've been neutral so long. And when you're neutral for that long, you tend to forget as a nation, as a people, how terrible war really is. So it's two-sided, really. It's two-sided. That's an answer.
So each of you share that different countries have their own way of remembering history and promoting peace. So like you said, Canada's multiculturalism, and Xiaoxiao, you were talking about the peace education here in China and also Sweden's neutral foreign policy. So after coming to China, what kind of differences do you see in, remembering history and promoting peace, and what stands out to you?
It's an interesting question because I can think of it from a macro and a micro perspective, but because I am observing China on a daily basis from a more micro perspective in terms of my interactions with Chinese, the interactions Chinese have amongst each other. My first response would be that I think in China, especially compared to the Western world, namely Canada and the US, there's a very big emphasis on social harmony and public order. So for example, if I see two people on my campus bike into each other, they will very peacefully stop, look at each, acknowledge what just happened, and continue on their journey. Whereas in my own country, a natural reaction would be to get a little bit antagonistic and accusatory of, why did you just do that? What are you doing? So I think that has sort of a, you can blow that up, or you can sort of apply that to all confrontations that you witness at different levels. And again, that just, to me, says there's a extreme emphasis on social harmony, that even when you encounter a frustrating situation, it's best to just assume that it was not the other person's intention to harm and move on and not let it affect the temper of the day, the mood of the day, the order. And I think this is also how China approaches its foreign policy as well, particularly if we observe it with Western countries, Canada and the US, where there are issues and sort of flashpoints that we could go into and we could discuss, but there's a conscious choice not to, unless it is logical and sound to do so. So better to avoid areas that we disagree on and focus on areas of mutual interest for the greater benefit. Whereas, again, in my own country and in the United States foreign policy, it's much more like that bike interaction where we have that sticking point, we're going to address it right away. We're not happy, this is why we're not happy, why are you doing this? Maybe that's not the most effective approach in the greater picture.
Thank you. And Xiaoxia, I'm not sure about you. Did you notice any differences through your interaction with international students?
International students? Well, in some of the conversations, I learned that in their countries, especially Western countries, they do have this art education or something more soft about the peace and the war. I think that's a little bit different from that in China, because we all, like, our activities about commemoration is we go to museums, we go to see these war-themed movies. That's a little bit different.
Right. So, well, first of all, when I lived in Sweden, I went to an international school, so I can't speak completely for how like Swedish local schools do their education. But one big difference that I feel from obviously my school in Sweden here in China is that when we talked about war and peace in school, it was more from an academic perspective. It was, as I said, we're studying history, and then we know that these things happened. For example, World War I and II, and we'd analyze like the reasons behind it. It was like just very academic. But we would never really spend the time talking about how precious peace is in the current day. I feel like here in China, there's a lot more emphasis on how important peace and stability is, for society and for the well-being of people. Whereas, yeah, as I said, like back when I was in Sweden, war and peace was more of an academic topic, And that also obviously has to do with the fact that in Sweden, it's not as closely linked to people's everyday lives. As I just said, we haven't been to war in almost 300 years. So there's no one alive today that has any memory of what a war would be like, which is different here in China. In China, there's still people alive that have experienced war and violence and things like that. So, you're going to appreciate it a lot more when you have the peace. So, yeah, that's definitely the biggest difference.
Thank you. And we always say that history is the best teacher. So what kind of lesson do you think we can learn from the past? Like, what kind of lesson from the past do you think is the most valuable for today's young people?
Why it's important to study our history is to remind ourselves that the approaches we've taken out of the past are not the ones that we always need to apply in the future. So I think the importance of studying history and understanding our history is to acknowledge the gravity of war, and that it is the most extreme outcome and we should avoid it at all costs, and that mutual coexistence is the best pathway forward. And that doesn't mean that you have to agree, but you have to accept that another party, whether it be another individual in your own society or another country, might have a different worldview, stance, etc. And that's fair and reasonable. You don't have to accept it, but you have to accept their right to have it. And if that's the cost of avoiding war, then that's a very fair trade-off that we have to accept and make.
Thank you. Xiaoxiao?
Yes, I think similar to her point. I think in our history, the wars are often seen as strategic choices by some nations. But I think the cost we learn from history is always out of someone's expectations before the war. Once the shoot is fired, the trauma and the scars are never contained. So I think this big cost led us to learn from history that we need to find a more rational solution. Maybe there are always confrontations or disagreements among countries, but I think war is the worst choice because of the cost that we learned from history.
Yeah, definitely. I think looking at history, reflecting on what happened, and looking forward, one of the most important things is looking at the root cause of war. And I mean, in my opinion, personally, I think that the root cause of a lot of wars is like structural injustice. Take a very simple example, the cause of World War II. Obviously, a large part of it was the Treaty of Versailles that Germany thought was very unfair. If you'd gone back to the end of World War I, and then maybe some of the diplomats or the politicians that were signing that, if they'd treated Germany a bit fairer, then maybe things would have been easier to handle, later on, So I think that first part, like why wars happen, structural injustice, very important. And then, in the process of war, what escalates war, what makes it worse? I mean, a lot of things, but for example, dehumanizing the opponent is very dangerous. You've seen that in a lot of wars before, that you take the opponent and usually through propaganda or through some kind of state means you dehumanize them, which makes violence towards this certain group of people not only acceptable, but also necessary. That's extremely dangerous. So I think, looking at that, when we look at, conflicts today, we can't dehumanize our opponent. We can't make a whole group of people, look like, one way. We have to be more. We have to be more biased. We have to be more human. We have to be more open.
Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone. So we've been talking about the echoes of history today. So before our conversation concludes, I have one last question for you. So what do you think these echoes of history mean for, building peace today? In one sentence.
In one sentence, mutual respect. We need to recognize our shared humanity and our differences and appreciate them for what they are instead of trying to change them.
Very similar to what Haley said. I would say respect diversity. I just talked about the dehumanizing thing. If you go to a place and you understand a place, for example, you come to China as a foreign student, you can't dehumanize that place because you're being exposed to a new culture, a different culture, right? You'll have a more well-sided view of it.
Well, I think it's we have so many historical stories about wars, so I think it's really time to stop this because there's always a war after a war. So it's the problem that we solve something by war, so we need to find other solutions.
All right, thank you so much, everyone, for sharing your ideas and thoughts today. History reminds us where we've been, and these memories guide us where we hope to go. And as young people, getting these echoes of history is the first step to making peace something we actually live every day. So thank you so much for watching this episode of Power Up Youth Plus, and we'll see you in the next episode. Bye.